Everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, I'm sharing an extraordinary story that will truly make you think about life and what might lie beyond. It's the near-death experience of Malcolm Miller when he almost died from stomach ulcer, and it's a story that's both deeply personal and incredibly powerful. Let's dive in and explore what Malcolm saw, felt, and learned when he crossed over to the other side, and came back to tell the tale.
For the most part of 2006, an acute stomach ulcer with morbid intentions was trying its best to kill me. On the October 26, 2006, it very nearly succeeded in achieving its fatal objective. There I was at home alone on a cold and rainy Sunday afternoon, next to the heater, stretched out on the couch with a beer in hand while watching TV, as one does when there is not much else to do. Suddenly, and with no warning at all, the ulcer perforated, creating a hole in the lining of my stomach. The onset of pain was immediate and intense, in a different league to any pain that I had ever experienced before. It was obvious to me that I was in serious trouble and had to act fast. Thankfully, I lived on a street through which a steady stream of taxis constantly passed. I managed to hail a passing taxi straight away, and arrived at the emergency ward of Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney within a few minutes, certainly faster than if I had called an ambulance. Emergency surgery prevented the ulcer from achieving its fatal objective, but post-operation the doctors could not wake me up from general anesthesia and had little choice but to intubate me. There I lay motionless, my eyes were firmly shut and a machine was breathing for me. As far as the doctors were concerned, critically ill patient Malcolm Miller was unconscious and oblivious to his surroundings, while life-supporting machines were keeping his body alive. The doctors were very wrong. Little did they know that I had moved out of my body into another dimension of life and felt very much alive. In fact, I felt more vibrant and wholesome than I'd ever felt before, a seriously good feeling from which I never wanted to escape. On a daily basis for 8 days, the doctors tried to wake me up without a hint of success. Eventually, on the 9th day they finally succeeded. Instead of continuing into the afterlife, my consciousness moved into reverse. As I woke up in intensive care, the physical world gradually began materializing through my fluttering eyelids, and since that fateful day, vivid remembrances of my time spent out of my body have remained with me, recollections that have slowly manifested as biological brain intelligence. There is nothing special about me whatsoever. I have never been a religious man in any way. Just believe me when I say I am no saint. Indeed, I am just an ordinary open-minded person of average intelligence, who happened to be at the right place at the right time. Had I been living in a rural area, far away from a major hospital, I would definitely not be here today. Had this occurred 50 years ago, there is every chance I would not have made it back to Earth to tell my story. My extraordinary brush with death occurred when I was 44 years of age. It was other-dimensional. And when a person who has spent 44 years in one dimension of life is suddenly thrown into another, they are bound to experience a degree of confusion. I have tried my best to describe what I saw, but earthly words cannot truly describe it. Therefore, my description must fall short of the mark. I can only convey my experience approximately, for accurately describing the conditions in the spirit world using words alone is literally impossible. To provide a comprehensive account of everything that I saw would be way beyond my capabilities. Of course, just like everybody else who has ever had an ND, I do not understand everything that I saw. And so, I have selected the parts that I understand, or at least the parts that I understand better than others, and left out what I clearly don't understand. From what I do understand, I have selected what I feel will be both interesting and beneficial to most people. Wherever possible, I have chosen to stick to the facts of the matter, while leaving my personal viewpoints alone. Of course, I hope that I capture your interest, or at least take you momentarily away from the stress of earthly life, and give you a glimpse of a subtle world that lies beyond the one in which you are now living. At the very least, I sincerely wish that I bring a glimmer of comfort and hope to you. While I've only experienced a somewhat diluted taste of what it is like to die, I can confidently say the experience was incredible. Unquestionably more unusual and intriguing than anything I've ever experienced before. But before I describe the events that actually took place, Let me take you back a couple of steps to my last recollection of being alive, as the paramedics frantically wheeled me away from the emergency ward to the operating theaters. As we approached the elevators, I strongly suspected that this would be the last admission I would ever make. It was my third admission to hospital in 6 months for treatment of chronic stomach ulceration. Throughout my adult life, my weight had fluctuated around 85 kilograms, but by this advanced stage of my illness, it had plunged to 57 kilograms. Which is mostly skin and bone considering I am a 6-foot-tall male of medium build. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in months. Naturally, I was severely undernourished and felt weaker than ever. Never before had I felt such an abject feeling of despair. Clearly, I could tell that I was in the process of dying, and boy did I know it. It was patently obvious to me that I was on my way out of this world. I felt the life being sucked out of me. Blind Freddy wouldn't have missed it. The last thing that I can remember before losing consciousness in the elevator was whispering to myself, "Oh my God, this is it! Nice knowing you, world." And then I passed out. The doctor's diagnosis pointed to a deadly serious stool pathology. Not only had an acute stomach ulcer perforated, creating a hole in the lining of my stomach in the process, but there were definite signs of kidney failure as my blood gas count was so out of whack, it belied the fact I was still alive. Nobody has ever called me a hypochondriac, but to say that things were touch and go would be understating the gravity of the situation somewhat. Gastric acid was leaking into my lungs and the oxygen in my blood was dropping fast. Immediate emergency surgery to close the hole in the lining of my stomach was essentially the only option available to the doctors, but they had to first stabilize my body for a time before considering the possibility of surgery. Had I been the anesthetist, no amount of money in the world would have persuaded me to do the job, considering the risks that general anesthetic posed on my weak and lifeless body. Anyhow, the doctors and nurses, bless their wonderful souls, did a great job and somehow patched me up just in the nick of time. However, post-operation I showed no sign of regaining consciousness. The doctors couldn't wake me up from general anesthesia and had no choice but to intubate me. They connected me to a ventilator and placed me in a coma. Exactly when I moved out of my body, I cannot say. It may have happened immediately after they intubated me. Perhaps it occurred a day after that, or even a day or two before I woke up. I will never know the exact point in time that I left my body, but I certainly did at some point in time while I was in a coma in 2006. One might assume that people immediately know they are in the process of dying when they suddenly find themselves consciously functioning outside their unconscious physical bodies. Of course, I can only speak for myself, but in my particular set of circumstances, this was not the case. The realization that functioning outside my body had anything to do with dying dawned upon me gradually. This was not the first time that I had left my body. Far from it. Since childhood, on numerous occasions throughout my life, on average I'd estimate 2 to 3 times per year, I have witnessed my sleeping body from the ceiling of my bedroom. When this phenomenon first occurred, one night when I was just a young boy around the age of 5 or 6, it terrified the living daylights out of me. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't wake up from the nightmare. I tried shouting out to my mother in the room next door repeatedly, but the words just wouldn't come out my mouth. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity of panic and fear, instant relief was provided the moment I woke up in the morning at the usual time. As is the case with most things in life, the first time it occurred was the hardest to handle, but the more times it happened to me, the less fearful I became of it. Over the years, I questioned all my friends and family to see if they had ever experienced the same thing, and to my pleasant surprise, I soon discovered that the phenomenon of witnessing one's sleeping body from the ceiling above was not as odd as I had thought. Slowly but surely, I became accustomed to it, and since my teenage years, the experience of witnessing my sleeping body from the ceiling a couple of times per year has seemed like par for the course. Once I became accustomed to it, I have always felt helpless but never fearful. Helpless because I have never been able to work out how to return to my sleeping body no matter how hard I have tried, but fearless because I knew that I would eventually wake up and everything would be okay. The usual routine had always been to patiently hover near the ceiling of my bedroom, waiting to regain consciousness. That's all there ever was to it. However, not this time. Not by any stretch of the imagination. On this particular occasion, the circumstances facing me were very different from simply witnessing my body on my bed from the ceiling, while asleep in the comfort and security of my bedroom at home, to which I had naturally become very accustomed. Firstly, I was in a coma in an intensive care ward hooked up to a ventilator, together with various other machines, drips, and tubes. Secondly, I actually experienced the sensation of floating out of my body, as if I was evaporating from it, which had never happened to me before. Thirdly, for the first time in my life, I did not find myself hovering near the ceiling, but instead found myself standing in an upright position on the ground next to my body on the bed. Indeed, this time I was faced with a very different proposition than the usual run-of-the-mill out-of-body experience, to which I had become accustomed during my sleep life at home. So there I was, standing in an upright position, next to my sleeping body in an ICU. I could clearly see my sick physical body stretched out on the bed, but I was also standing next to it, alive and well. And I could see everything in the room around me, clearly defined, although there was a certain mistiness throughout the ICU. The nurse attending to my body did not seem to notice me at all. She made no effort to talk to me or help me in any way, nor did she try to usher me to lie back down on the bed. As I stood next to my body, gazing down upon it, I shouted out plenty of expletives, loudly and repeatedly, make no bones about it. But this is a family book. Let's just say it felt mandatory to ask myself the ultimate question. Am I dreaming or am I dead? Fortunately, I worked out the answer straight away when it dawned upon me that my body was hooked up to a ventilator, along with a complicated network of machines, drips, and tubes. Naturally, I concluded, I couldn't be dead. If I was dead, I reasoned with myself, surely the doctors would have disconnected the machines and placed a sheet over my lifeless body. The realization that a machine was breathing for me alarmed me somewhat, but it also provided a sense of relief. There seemed nothing unnatural or unusual about witnessing my body lying on the bed. If anything, I felt a curious sense of sympathy towards it, as if I was looking down upon a completely different person. The thought of what to do next entered my head, but help was close at hand. As I pondered over the strange set of circumstances in which I had inadvertently found myself, a casually dressed doctor with a stethoscope draped around his neck approached a computer monitor next to the bed. He sat down, examined the screen closely, and wrote a few notes on my patient file located near the foot of the bed. Then he calmly turned towards me, looked me squarely in the eyes, and spoke to me. I'll never forget that defining moment for the term of my natural life, and then some more. Tell you! That was the part of the whole experience that felt more unreal than anything else. As he introduced himself, I tried my best to remain as calm as possible, but beneath the surface I was trembling like a leaf. I tried to get a grip on my thoughts with an internal command. Discipline, Malcolm, you've always wanted to be in a situation like this, and now you're actually in it. Don't stuff it up. Don't fall to pieces and waste the opportunity of a lifetime. Keeping my cool under such unusual circumstances was not an easy thing to achieve. Somehow, in a roundabout way, I managed to pull myself together and spoke back to him, just as I had always done, by simply using my vocal cords. He introduced himself as Thomas but told me to call him Tom for short. He spoke with such a calm sense of authority. I never felt the need to doubt him for a minute. Nothing in his tone or attitude struck me as being even mildly out of place. Every word he said was delivered without any hesitation whatsoever, like a mathematician who really knew his stuff. After introducing himself, he told me to place myself entirely in his hands because that, he insisted, was precisely what he was there for. He asked me to hold his hand firmly, and just leave the rest to him. He warned me that we would move through a dark space in order to get to our destination and not to be afraid in the slightest. Although it has taken some time in the telling, so that I can provide you with as much information as possible, the entire process of leaving my body behind in the ICU seemed to have taken just a few minutes. As we departed the ward, the mist in the room thickened and the ICU faded from my vision. In a matter of seconds we were moving through an infinite dark space of sorts. But I trusted Tom was in complete control of the situation, so I never doubted all was well. I felt the sensation of floating, such as I had experienced many times in my dreams, but this felt a lot more real than during my sleep life at home. Due to the darkness, and also due to the absence of gravity, it was impossible for me to tell where I was in relation to my body in the hospital, nor could I tell if I was moving in an upright or a reclined position. I had never experienced moving through a giant dark space before and naturally felt disoriented at first, but it wasn't long before I felt secure, comfortable and content, a feeling of peace and equanimity. Instinctively, as I moved through the darkness, the reality of death crossed my mind. I questioned the validity of my life on Earth. Do I only get one shot at life? Does my life have a purpose? What have I done with my life? Have I been a good person? Have I been selfish? Have I hurt others? Instantly, I received the answers to all of my questions. All of a sudden, my entire life flashed before my eyes, complete in every detail. Every event and scenario that had occurred during my life was there for me to examine, and I had the opportunity to scrutinize all or any part of it. It is impossible for me to say how long the life review actually lasted. The entire review appeared to last for only a split second, because all the events of my entire life were shown to me simultaneously. Yet I was free to examine each and every part of my life, piece by piece, to the finest detail. Time was subjective and distance was non-existent, because I was in every place at the same time. When my attention was drawn to a particular situation or set of circumstances, there I was already experiencing the moment. In other words, I literally saw every last detail of my entire life, compressed into a split second. An entire lifetime compressed into a split second? At first, the whole idea might seem preposterous, even impossible. To use an earthly analogy to help you understand, imagine you are driving along a long and windy road. At each bend in the road lies a hill, preventing you from seeing what is around the corner, until you actually round the bend. Now imagine that each hill represents a night's sleep, and that each time you arrive around that hill represents you waking up the following morning. You can only see what exists in front of you. You cannot see what is around the next bend in the road. You can remember what was behind the hill that you have just rounded, but you cannot see any of it. You can also remember much of what happened behind the previous hills, but each time you round a new bend, the memories of your past slowly fade away. Now imagine that you are lifted high into the sky by a helicopter. Suddenly, you can see everything that you had left behind you. Your memories of the past can all be recalled, simultaneously. Now you can clearly see your past. Everything makes a lot more sense to you, because you can see so much more. And you can see into the future, not with a great degree of accuracy because the future is still not clear, but certainly clearer than if you were standing on the ground. Not only did I review my life from my own personal viewpoint, but also from the perspective of others with whom I had connected at various times and places. Now I knew precisely what people were thinking and feeling about me. Every time I hurt someone's feelings, I felt their pain. Now I felt the results of all my hurtful words and deeds. I could literally sense their every thought and feeling in response to me, which felt downright awful. On the other side of the fence, every time I was kind, or whenever I had helped people or brought them happiness, I felt their joy and appreciation. For the first time, I truly understood how I had affected others and also how they had affected me. What an eye-opener that was! Not everything on earth was as it had appeared to be, that's for sure. And many things that I thought were true were not so true after all. But there was no injustice whatsoever in my life review, for I could see that I was the architect of all my actions and the master of all my virtues and vices, as we all are. Observing myself and everyone around me from the perspective of a third person was something like watching a video of a family vacation. However, the review of my life was no fun-filled holiday, by any stretch of the imagination. The power of creation, or God if you prefer, showed me not only what I had done with my life, but also what I had failed to achieve. Each significant moment from my life was highlighted, accompanied by an insight into the universal law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect is an unbreakable, immutable natural law, under which we are all born and remain forever under its jurisdiction. At one level or another, I could see how all my experiences had been created by the effects of my preceding causes. And I could see how each cause was linked to a future effect. In other words, I understood that the whole idea of karma was essentially an idea of action, encompassing all the linked series of causes and effects that make up human activity. The law of cause and effect, or karma as it is widely known, plays a vital role in the shaping of all our destinies, not only in the physical world, but in the afterlife as well. Throughout the life review, the value and importance of love was clearly highlighted to me, over and over and over again. The life review was not a reflection of my conscience, nor a projection of my ego. It certainly was not a figment of my imagination.